Hi, in this Lightboard session we're going to talk about policies and how they apply to the different API layers. So in the API-led connectivity approach we have three layers. We have our experience, we have our process, and we have our system. So these are the different types of APIs that break apart your application so that instead of having a big ball of mud, you end up with a structured, layered architecture. Now, when we're talking APIs, we're using APIs as the way to wrap up functionality, and there are certain cross-cutting concerns that we don't want to do in code every single time. So those are good candidates for policies. Now, there are a range of out-of-the-box policies that you may want to make use of, and you can also build custom policies. But when you are looking at your governance, so trying to work out which ones to apply where, coming up with a blanket rule that applies to all of the layers is going to be a bit problematic because they are different intentions. So when you're dealing with system APIs, your job at the system layer is to protect the downstream systems or to unlock the data that comes out of those. So the sort of things you may need to do to protect certain legacy systems that can't handle high load, for instance, might be different from the sort of policies that at an experience level, you're potentially having clients that are not within your realm of trusted applications. So you might be exposing functionality out to external clients, for instance. So I think to get a meaningful set of rules for the different types of policies to apply, think about the layers and think about the sort of things you might need to do. Now, experience APIs, well, some of those could be exposed to the outside world. So in those situations, I think you have to assume that even though you might be getting correct credentials, you could have a compromised application because it's outside the realm of what you can personally control and so on. So a mobile application, for instance, it's on a device that you don't control. So some of the things you may need to consider, so additional security related policies. So things like the JSON or XML threat protection. If you take in JSON or XML from something in the experience layer, then it could have this could open up a vector for attack because you could feed in a very deeply nested JSON or XML structure, which depending on your implementation, could expose other information that could open up other types of attacks. So I think for anything external, taking that extra level of safety, treating the payload as another source of a security problem. Now, at the bottom two layers, depending on your needs around protecting downstream systems, you've got to find the appropriate spot to do things like rate limiting and so on. So I think at any level, you could do rate limiting. You're going to need to do security at all levels because you don't want any level exposing functionality without credentials required and so on. But for certain use cases down at the system layer, so let's say we've got some sort of legacy database or an application. Maybe these are not going to scale to the level needed to address the client requirements. So this could be a point where at your API level, you could rate limit. Now, rate limiting could be anywhere in here, but in this situation, we're trying to protect the application. So that's where rate limiting might play a role. Now, caching is another way to protect your downstream systems. Now, caching at an appropriate level is important because the closer to the client that you can do this, the quicker you can respond with the existing data that you've got in your cache. So if you do the caching down at this level, that will definitely save you from requests, but you've got this hop down through the layers. So potentially at the experience layer might be a more appropriate spot for that. Now, regardless of where you apply your policies, you've got the ability to go and do an audit of this. Now, this is something that Visualizer has some capabilities. So when you go to Visualizer, one of the views gives you the ability to select your existing policies and work out for APIs that are managed by any point, whether those policies have been applied. So if you had a custom policy for auditing, you might apply that at every layer. And you want to make sure that every API that you have applies that policy. So you could tick the box on that and look at your overall landscape and then see, this one hasn't it isn't within compliance reasons, or it isn't within compliance for that particular API policy. Now, if you've got a layering approach, then selecting just certain parts of your ecosystem, so you could select an entire layer and then run the policies that you expect at those layers. So you may expect a different set of policies for these bottom two layers, and you want to make sure that those have those policies applied, but your experience layer, because this is a bit more freeform, because it is to deal with client experience, you may look for other policies, say for instance, JSON or XML threat protection. So because there's such a wide range that you can do in the experience layer, this one will probably be something that you'll have a lot of different variations, but these bottom two layers, I think that's where you'll start to see some standard policies get applied. And that's talking about policies on your different API layers.